Thin Lizzy, Phil Lynott, and Gary Moore. What an exciting topic to talk about. And I remember Paris in '49. Well, not quite myself, for sure not. But even Phil didn't remember in '49 the year he was actually born, but definitely not in Paris. In fact, not even in France, and for that matter, not even in Ireland, even though for most of his life, his professional life, he was very vocal and upfront about his Irish descendants and heritage. He wrote songs about Ireland, but he was not born there. He was born in England, where his mother ran a small business of some sort. And the father disappeared. He was some foreign military, and he skipped town when his unit moved. He skedaddled from the mother and the child. And at the age of 3, the mother could not take care of him anymore and run the business simultaneously. So she shipped him off to Ireland, where her parents actually lived, and he grew up with his grandparents. And that year was also the year that Gary Moore was born, actually in Ireland, in Belfast. And eventually the two of them met. Both of them became very, very interested in music at an early age. Gary got a guitar for some sort of event, birthday, Christmas, at a very, very early age, and he became almost a child prodigy, or maybe not almost, an actual child prodigy. He figured out the chords and the scales and the notes very early on, and at the age of 6, 7, 8 or so, he was already playing. He was playing for small audiences, obviously not stadiums. But he was a very able and talented musician, and of course it didn't hurt that the family was fairly musical. His father was a promoter, so he booked events, and so he knew a lot of people in the business, a lot of musicians, a lot of bands, managers, record labels, and so on and so forth. And if memory serves, I think that the mother also played some instrument, had at least some weak link to music, maybe not a professional musician. Anyway, in the meantime, Phil also is growing up. He's a very outgoing and social and bubbly kind of personality, has a lot of friends, and he also becomes interested in music at an early age. Gary goes full professional at a very, very early stage, something like age 15 or 16, and he already earns a reputation of being an able musician, not only on the guitar, but pretty much any musical instrument that he picks up, he becomes fairly proficient at, which I've read it in multiple places. And apparently Dublin was a much more important hub than Belfast, so he moves to Dublin at age 15 approximately to go full professional, and that's where he meets a lot of friends. He starts to play in local bands, school bands, and so on and so forth. And fate brings him together with Phil. They get to know each other. I think that at this stage Phil was already in Skid Row, or joined very shortly thereafter. And he notices Gary playing, and he tells the band leader, Bruce Shields, about Gary. And when Skid Row's guitarist leaves, Gary gets the gig. But there has to be a little bit twist in the tail. Bruce decides to fire Phil, apparently because he was singing falsely. He was singing off tune or off key. He couldn't hold the notes. Later it was revealed that he had some problem with his throat, with his tonsils. Be it as it may, Bruce sacks Phil, and they become a three-piece band, a trio, with Bruce on vocals and bass, Noel Bridgman on the drums, and Gary on the guitar. And Bruce felt very, very badly and guilty about firing Phil, and so he taught him to play bass. And Phil became a bassist. He picked it up fairly well and went his own way. He arranged his problems with his tonsils, and so he was able to sing. And around that time, Skid Row finally got a record deal, and they entered the studio to start recording their first record. Around this time, I think a little bit before they recorded, and definitely before they released the first record, Gary guested on a local band's album. It's called The Intentions, or Granny's Intentions, and the album is Honest Injun. Gary plays on about half of the songs, so maybe something like 4 out of 10 or 4 out of 9, if I'm not mistaken. And also after the release of Skid Row, he guested also about half, maybe more than half the album of Dr. Strangely Strange's album Heavy Petting or No Heavy Petting, I don't remember. Both of these records are okay, listenable, kind of folk-ish, little bit rock-ish, rockabilly-ish records. You can find both of them on YouTube. On the used record markets, original copies go for very expensive because people want them. Gary Moore became quite famous after the internet age, and so these are research. But realistically, there's no other reason to own these records than collecting purposes. Just if you're a diehard Gary fan, so they're not super interesting to listen. Not even as much as Skid Row, incidentally. In 1970. Gary is only 17 years old, and Skid Row releases this record. I should have taken it out of the plastic sleeves, but this is the first Skid Row record. Sometimes it's also known as Dublin Gas Comic, which is short for company, simply because that's what it says on the front sleeve picture. The record company is not too happy with this record for various reasons. It doesn't sound the way they want, and so they forced the band back into the studio to re-record this album. And I am not so sure what the exact story is, but I've heard or read somewhere that they even recalled this. But this was re-released in '83, so these copies are available for reasonable prices. There's a cool little liner notes here. The music, again, it's for interest purposes. You're interested in hearing what Gary sounded when he was 16, 17. He was definitely nowhere near what he sounded from, let's just say, 78 on, from back on the streets. Nevertheless, this is listenable. I won't lie to you, I don't listen to it every day, probably not even every month, but I do give it a couple spins a year. So it's fun to listen to it. Sandy's Gone, the opening track, is not bad. The Man Who Never Was, the second song. I'm Co-op Showband Blues, that's I think the famous song. It even has a video that was colorized later on, and you can find it on YouTube and such. Virgo's Daughter, New Faces, All Places, and Felicity, I think, was released in a single before the album, and an original copy fetches a very decent price, somewhere in the $300. This is the re-released version, and it's very similar. The differences are not gigantic. It's half the same songs, half other titles, which are kind of sort of completely new songs. At least that's how they're marketed, or just modified takes or modified versions of those songs with different titles. Again, not super exciting, nothing super interesting here. I have in mind, or an idea, to record both of these into one video. In other words, record all of the songs from that one that don't figure here, that are not included here, first, and then stagger the songs. So whatever, there's approximately 5 songs in common. Mad Dog Woman, Virgo's Daughter, and so on. So whichever is double, play one from one record from the first one, then the other one from the second one, and then people can compare. And then at the end of the video, go for those that are only on this guy, not on the first one. But I'd have to find the time and the will to do that. After this is released, or in the meantime, while Gary is with Skid Row, Phil is putting together Thin Lizzy. He recruits Brian Downey, the drummer who was with him in some other band previously. They had a band Shades, and they had a band Blue Orphanage, or some sort of like this. I might be misquoting the names exactly, but they were in several bands, and so they knew each other. And they meet a new guitarist, Eric Bell, and they release Thin Lizzy. Thin Lizzy, the first album. But I want to finish with Skid Row first, besides the fact that I unfortunately don't have Thin Lizzy. Never had it, in fact. I've seen it once in a record store. It was a fairly beaten up copy that I didn't really want to have. It has the record itself didn't look good, and the jacket for sure not. And they wanted a little bit too much for it. I was a teenager at the time, so I didn't pick it up. And the second time I've seen it was already in the modern era, the post vinyl return, post 2010, and it was a digitalized reprint, and I certainly wasn't ready to pay 30 odd or close to $40 for it. But anyway, this is 34 Hours, Skid Row's second record, and there is a notable step forward or progress, if you will, from the first Skid Row release. So in the first Skid Row release, they definitely sound like what you would expect. A bunch of eager, very energetic teenagers just letting rip and letting it roar and going all mad in the studio. So not super professional. The playing is great, but they don't really keep it down together, so they don't have that experience and that feel on how to make a well-polished record. Not that this one is polished or super professional, but you can definitely hear the step forward. Very weird album, very weird. You can hear the bass player sort of trying to decide where he wants to go. More of a rock, more of a fusion, more of a folkish, folk rock kind of direction. But anyway, this is the main criticism level typically against Skid Row, that they didn't know what they were doing or where they were going or what they wanted to be. And it's a fairly correct, fairly fair criticism. Yet I have some reservations for it. I'll touch upon that at a later point. Night of the Warm Reach, the opener, is pretty cool. Has several parts to it. So it looked like they were going into a sort of a progressive, almost fusion-y direction here. Mar is not bad. The love story, so it's okay, it's listenable, but pretty much like the first one. So again, the main reason to have this record is not so much the music than just the significance. If you're not a die-hard Gary fan or a collector or have specific interest in this kind of music, eager young up-and-coming bands with this sort of kind of folkish music, then there is no sound reason to really own it. The third Skid Row record was never released, at least not until 1990. So this was pressed and released in 1990, but it was recorded in 71 or 2. It's called Skid Row, featuring Gary Moore, Brush Hills, and Noel Bridgman. And this sounds like a big step forward. When I heard this record, my first reaction was, there is no way in holy hell that this is Gary in 71, 72. This is still got the blues Gary playing here. So I have the feeling that he got the tapes and he did something. Maybe he overdubbed, overplayed, cleaned up. But to me, Gary's guitar does not sound like a 16, 17, 18-year-old Gary. Again, good record, worth a spin or two. Benedict's Cherry Wine, again, the opener is the one that's really worth listening to. Silverbird, the closer, is quite a nice number. They're all okay. Crystal Ball, Saturday Morning Man. Again, like I said, it's worth a spin or two once or twice a year. Not super important if you're not a diehard Gary fan. Let's move on to early Thin Lizzy. The first three Thin Lizzy records released in 71, 72, and 73, respectively, are the Decca records. They had a deal with Decca, and this is the least famous era of the band. The songs are okay. They are, in a sense, comparable to Skid Row, in that it's very young, enthusiastic musicians doing music and giving it a lot of energy, but not so professional. So that they have in common. However, I think that they had better management, better production, better advice, better guidance than Skid Row had. Skid Row seemed to be a very independent. All three of them were super independent minded. And while Philip was also like that, I think that he was a little bit more open to get advice from the more experienced and professionals. Or maybe the record just forced him. But at any rate, the songs sound a little bit better made than Skid Row. The actual songs on Thin Lizzy, the first record that I unfortunately never had, not that great, not that memorable, and all of them can be found on the compilations that Decca put out after Thin Lizzy became famous. This is the only one that I have right now, but this one has a part 2, so this is Remembering part 1. There is a Remembering part 2, and there are quite a number of other compilations. I think both by Decca, and then I think they sold the rights to Castle, one of these compilation companies. So you can have, I think, all or almost all songs released on the first 3 without buying the first 3. You can just get the compilation, and to be honest, they are not super interesting. From Thin Lizzy 1, meaning Thin Lizzy self-titled record, the good songs are Honesty Is No Excuse. That's the one that is typically put on most compilations. Air or ear, I don't know how to say that. It means iron in Irish. That's a good tune. Brought Down. These are the memorable songs. Ray Gun, Didi Levine. It's okay. They're all okay, all listenable. Nothing outlandish. And this has Lynott, Brian Downey, and Eric Bell. Eric Bell on guitar. This compilation has Black Boys in the Corner, Not a Bad Number, Song for While I'm Away, listenable. Randolph's Tango, pretty good. This is a traditional Irish melody transcribed or rearranged. Little Girl in Bloom is okay. Shitamoya is a great song. I think it wasn't released on any of the first 3 Thin Lizzy records. Apparently Gary Moore plays on that song, because Gary Moore came in to help Lynott while he was looking for a guitarist. Little Darling, good song. Remembering, not bad. Gonna Creep Up on You, okay, kind of a more aggressive song. Whiskey in the Jar, okay, that's their big classic. I don't know if it became a big hit, but it was a minor hit. It was released between Thin Lizzy and Shades of a Blue Orphanage, the second record. And of course The Rocker, which is from Vagabonds. That's the big classic. Rocker is a big classic recorded on Vagabonds. Shades of a Blue Orphanage comes out in 72. Small step forward, although some people will tell you that it's a step backward. There are less, I think, if memory serves, less memorable, less good songs on it. You got Buffalo Girl, which typically gets put on compilations. Brought Down, I'm sorry, Brought Down was not from the first one. It's from this one. Babyface. These are pretty much the only ones that are quite memorable. So again, worth a spin on occasion. Not super interesting. Vagabonds is already a bigger step forward, in my opinion. The record sounds good, sounds better made, sounds better planned, thought out. The musicians sound better together. The hero and the madman, kind of a saga that's already from not from the music, but from the words, the lyrics point of view. Very early on, Lynott already started these actually storylines. So you have the hero and the madman, not a great story, but pretty much the beginning of what would later on become known as a classic Thin Lizzy in quote marks. Mama Nature said, good one. The Rocker, of course, that's a classic. Vagabonds of the Western World, I don't even remember that song. Little Girl in Bloom, nice one. I think it figures on this compilation. Gonna Creep Up on You, also from the same compilation. Pretty aggressive, going to show you what is to come. And then A Song for a Mile Away, which is a nice little quiet lullaby or ballad, if you want. So this much for Lizzy's first 3 records. Let's take a look at what's up with Gary in the meantime. In '73, Gary releases this masterpiece. This is an insane record. I had it very early on when I started being mad and crazy about Gary. This is probably among my first 10, I would say, first 10 Gary Moore records. And hell, to me, it definitely qualifies for a place of honor in Gary's top 10. Great records. The 2 great, incredible, memorable songs are Grinding Stone and Sail Across the Mountain. Time to Heal is okay. The Energy Dance is okay. And Spirit's the big one. Boogie My Way Back Home is kind of like a closer, little funny song, but it's okay. But Grinding Stone, Sail Across the Mountain, and Spirit are masterpieces. And this definitely shows you where Gary is going. And in my opinion, this record is representative of pretty much everything that Gary would do throughout the rest of his career. It has a little bit of everything. It has a lot of fusion-y, progressive-y, folk-y, with strong blues undertones. Bluesy, like outright bluesy, not really. You hear it here and there on the record, but not a lot. And yet on the undertones, you can hear that he sneaks in here and there the little blues flavor, the blues licks. But it's a mostly fusion-oriented fusion with a little aggressive rock, with a little bit of folkish influences. Very good record. I wholeheartedly recommend it. And I truly believe that no Gary Moore collection is complete without it. The typical criticism leveled against this record is, as you might have imagined, it lacks direction, it's all over the place, and come on. Whenever I hear this argument, I think to myself, so what would you rather have? Motorhead, AC/DC, George Thorogood, ZZ Top, this kind of band? It's always pretty much the same thing with minor variations. You know, the same criticism is very often leveled against the Blue Oyster Cult, because they have so many different things, even in the same song. They all of a sudden they go to do these jazz scales and the typical characteristic jazz bass. And then the song turns into heavy metal, into a mellow part, and tempo changes. So people don't like it. Well, you don't like it, don't listen to it. But who said that every record and every band has to be always the same thing? Only blues, or only heavy metal, or only folk rock. It's idiotic in my mind. At any rate, in '74, Phil has some difficulties with Thin Lizzy. Excuse me for a second here. Thank you. This is not beer, by the way. I would never, ever drink on the job. You know me. You know me, this guy. Phil calls in Gary to help him out in the absence of musicians, of a guitarist, and he's recording Nightlife, and Gary participates in a couple songs thereon. To my deep sorrow and shame, I don't have anymore the Nightlife copy from my childhood, and I don't have one, but I really have to get one ASAP. Nightlife is the one that really becomes Thin Lizzy as they are going to be known from that point on. It features the new lineup, so already listed on the record are Gorham and Robertson, even though Robertson came first, and I think he came fairly late into the recording, so a lot of the songs were already mostly ready. He put down the guitar, and then him and Phil hired Gorham, which is a whole funny story on its own. Gorham had an arrest warrant against him in the States, so he went to England and was looking for a job, and he didn't have a good guitar, and it was a little difficult to play, but they passed the audition anyway, and he was hired. Nightlife has some classic songs. Still in Love with You, of course, became a staple immediately. They played it in all the concert. Sha-la-la is sort of like a rocker number 2, very energetic, fast, great song. It's Only Money, pretty typical Thin Lizzy song. Frankie Carroll is kind of a ballad, musically not very typical, but the story is kind of a very typical Thin Lizzy story, in the vein of all of the story kind of songs. Jailbreak, Johnny, you name it, Black Rose, Hollywood, all of these songs that are really stories or personal stories. Banshee, not a bad track. Showdown, pretty cool. Gonna be a little showdown, a little mid tempo, a little bit on the quieter side. Good record. Not great, not earth shattering, but a very good record. And some may disagree with me that this is the true staple Thin Lizzy. Some will tell you that this is really a bridge between the Decca Lizzy and the Vertigo, or the new or modernized Thin Lizzy, if you will. And they definitely have a point, but again, they had the lineup, they had the change in music, they had the dual guitars, not super prominent, because again, Robertson and Gorham were not that much involved in the recording. Gorham maybe very little, maybe some overdubs, but you can already hear a little bit of the introduction or a teaser, a taster from what's to come. So many people will tell you that this is the first real Thin Lizzy. And while I personally don't super agree with it, I don't argue with it either. It's the one that features the square logo, sort of like Judas Priest, that became Judas Priest really when they changed. Well, a little bit before actually. The logo was there since Stained Class. But anyway, this is a very, very good record. And what's special about this record, to me at least, that this was the first Thin Lizzy record that I ever bought. I heard about, I know Thin Lizzy, heard maybe a couple of tracks, so I said, let's give him a try, and I picked this up in a record store. This is not the same copy, this is from my new library. But anyway, opening track, Rosalie, is a cover, Bob Seger cover, good song, nothing wrong with it, but nothing earth-shattering. For Those Who Love to Live, very nice, sweet, kind of mellow, very typical Phil lyrics. Suicide, this is the one that kind of gets into a little bit harder, faster tempo. Wild One, this is the one that grabbed me. As soon as I heard the opening harmonies of Wild One, I was hooked. I'm like, I gotta have all of their records. This is a great band. This is the one that sold me on Thin Lizzy. And this is the one that made me keep coming back for you once again. Finding My Way Back, also good song. King's Vengeance, good, very good. Borderline great song. When the Spirit Slips Away, very nice, slow ballad, I like it. Silver Dollar is okay. Freedom Song, not bad. Ballad of the Hardman. The last three are less stellar, but Spirit Slips Away, beautiful. King's Vengeance, great song, I would say. Suicide, and of course Wild One, that takes the cake unquestionably. Really, really good record, and again, must have for Thin Lizzy fans. Let's go on to Jailbreak. So chronologically, we will skip over what Gary's doing at the moment, and we'll run away. So I won't cover them exactly chronologically, but I group them. And then Thin Lizzy goes to Jailbreak. Very, very famous record. This is the one that has Dancing in the Moonlight. I'm sorry, The Boys Are Back in Town. And this gives them some good publicity. This is when they start to crack the market, to really getting into it, becoming famous, getting a taste of rock and roll fame. Jailbreak, all-time classic, great song. Angel from the Coast, I love that song. Running Back, I Keep Running Back to You. Romeo and the Lonely Girl, good story. Warriors, this is a great song. It's quite similar to Emerald, but Emerald is really the big one from the record. Boys Are Back in Town is the big hit. Fight or Fall, okay, listenable. Cowboy Song is a classic. I'm not a super huge fan, but it's a good song. But Emerald is definitely the one to listen to. Great, incredible, crazy great song. Good record. Where does it rank in my favorite Thin Lizzy's? Well, Thin Lizzy, we can't really do a top 10 because they have 12 records altogether. But this is fairly high. Good record. Next up, Johnny the Fox. He called to Jimmy the Weed. And as soon as I heard the opening riff for Johnny, I was hooked. And I'm sorry, I can't put it back in the sleeve right now. This record, when I got it, I think this was maybe the fourth or the fifth Thin Lizzy record that I got. I fell in love with it immediately. Everything about the record, the sound, the music, the songs, everything was just perfect. The cover art, great. I just love this. It's incredible record, and this was my favorite Thin Lizzy record for a very long time. If such things exist, then officially in quote marks, it's still somehow my favorite. Although music-wise, it has been superseded by other records, as we shall see. Johnny, great song. Rocky, not bad at all. Borderline, amazing. Don't Believe a Word, of course, Don't Believe a Word. It's a classic, it's a hit. It's an amazing song. Fool's Gold, beautiful song. I like everything about the song. The playing, the guitars, the melody lines, the storyline. Even I typically don't listen to words, but in this case, beautiful story. Johnny the Fox meets Jimmy the Weed, also a little bit weird, but great song. Old Flame, very good, very listenable. Massacre, of course, another classic, great song. Sweet Marie, not bad at all. And Boogie Woogie Dance, man, this is a banger. It's kind of in the same vein as Shalala and The Rocker. He has a couple of songs like this that in some sense could be the same song almost. Very important and great record. Has a special place in my heart. And this is it for this. So this is kind of Thin Lizzy Part 2, becoming successful, becoming famous. Let's take a look at Gary in the meantime, shall we? In this time, so in '73, Gary released that amazing record, Grinding Stone, and then later on he joins one John Heisman, virtuoso musician who unfortunately died not very long ago, 2018 or so, if I'm not mistaken, and they form a band called Colosseum II. John Heisman, great, crazy, virtuoso drummer, had already had a Colosseum band prior to that with Mark Clark. At a certain point, Chris Farlow was with that band. His wife, Barbara Thompson, who was a famous saxophonist, was at times in a band, but it was mostly him and Mark Clark, and then revolving door of musicians. Anyway, he later on disbanded that first Colosseum. He had Tempest, and now was looking for a new band, and he recruited Gary, and also Don Airey, and one Neil Marie. So if you're familiar with those names, you know that this is an all-star lineup, and this was their first output. So this is Colosseum II. Like I said, Gary John Heisman, Don Airey, and Neil Marie. This record is a little bit difficult to describe. If you look at the front picture of the sleeve, that's pretty much what it sounds like. It's crazy, it's insane, it's for retarded talented musicians, but it somehow does not hold together, if that makes sense. It's kind of very proggy, very fusiony, very also kind of hard rock-ish. So I'm not against blending different styles and being all over the place. Like I said, it's good, it brings variety, but here it's not done as well, as good as it should have been done or could have been done. I think that they had a lot of ideas and it was overflowing, and each one was kind of doing a little bit what they wanted to do. So it doesn't congeal that well. Thus said, it's an interesting record. It's interesting to listen to from time to time. More than anything, it's rock. So it has a lot of fusion, a lot of prog, a lot of different ideas in it, but it's a rocking record. And after this record, Neil Marie left, and they got another bass player, John Moll, of whom I have never ever heard anything else. But to be honest with you, I didn't do a ton of research either. Their next output, this one, Electric Savage, Colosseum II. This is the one that's gonna knock your socks off. This record, phenomenal. I don't have enough good things to say about it. This is, you don't have to like Gary Moore to buy this record. It's freaking insane. All the songs are great on it. The Scorch, of course, stands out. Desperado, Intergalactic, they're all crazy great. So here they fixed everything that was wrong with Strange New Flesh. It's just no words. This one, I put it on often, and each time it just sends me through the roof. It's crazy good. Gary is amazing, all of them. John Moll stands out very much. John Heisman with his drumming, like a proto Neil Peart. I almost said Neil Peart. I apologize to all Rush fans. I almost said Neil Peart. That's the greatest crime in the world. That's before Thou Shalt Not. Anyway, and Don Airey also, a young Don Airey. You can sort of kind of hear what's going to happen in Rainbow. How do I avoid being a fanboy? What criticism can I level against this record? Well, the front cover is a little kind of nothing-ish, but my real criticism, it's a tiny criticism, but if I need to, if I have to, if I want to at all costs find fault with this record, I would say that it's a tiny little bit too Al Di Meola-ish. It came out in the same time, 77, as Al Di Meola's famous record, Elegant Gypsy, came out. That was during his work with Chick Corea. Chick is not featured on that record, but there was just a tad bit too much of that it's apparent that you can hear it. So I think that Gary borrowed just a tiny drop too much from Al on this record, but otherwise it's a very good record, very professional, very polished. Again, no words. The next album came out in the same year, so I guess that they were recording in 76 and missed the deadline, so I had to release it in 77, is this bad boy, War Dance. Very similar, and yet a step forward. So it's not an Electric Savage #2. It's a different record. It's the same band, and if I have to pick favorites between these two, it's not easy. They're both great bands, but I would go with this one. And the reason being because they fixed quote unquote, what was wrong with that. So they removed the El Di Meola references or the El Di Meola similarities. You can smell it here also a little bit, but it's just an aroma, a little bit here and there, not too much, really minimal. And that's again, if you're looking for it and you've heard the record many times, so you listen to the small nuances, they fixed it. They fixed the El Di Meola thing, and also I think that this record, it's sort of contradictory. It's like an oxymoron, but it sounds more professional and more raw at the same time. So in other words, the production is not as silky smooth as on the other one. The other one is not overproduced by any measure of the word, by any means. But this one sounds a little more spontaneous. I had a feeling that this one was recorded, if not entirely live, but very live. Probably 2 or 3 of them playing simultaneously and then putting on the drums. That's how I imagine it. So I have a feeling that they were all in the same room playing together with very minimal intervention. They were well rehearsed, but these sound like first, second take. So not overproduced, just great. What are the great standouts? Major keys, Fighting Talk, The Inquisition, man, all of them, Quasar, War Dance, they all great. Again, a great record, a great record. If you like fusion, kind of borderline jazz, not real, definitely not traditional jazz, but kind of borderline modern jazz fusion, with a lot of madness, with a lot of rock infused in it, a lot of kind of somewhat proggy ideas fused in. These records are for you, and it's really difficult to make a decision between the two of them, but I would, if I have to, I'll give the nod to War Dance. Next up comes a record that is not really officially billed as Colosseum II. This is Variations. This has an interesting backstory in and of itself, but it features the entire band. So this is Colosseum II were hired to back one Julian Lloyd Webber, who is the little brother of one Andrew Lloyd Webber. Not so well known in the States, but in England he's kind of the very famous promoter, producer, musician, kind of the Vince Lombardi of England, if you want. And he had a little brother, Julian Lloyd Webber, who was a classic cellist, but no fame and fortune and such. So I guess he wanted to give him a favor and give him a little bit more promotion and bring him a little fame, maybe a little bit visibility. Sounds kind of like a charitable project, to be honest with you. So Andrew Lloyd Webber has said, let's do this, and they made Variations on Paganini theme. As far as listening to the record, you might be surprised, but I listened to this record for sure not as much as Electric Savage and War Dance, but more than Strange New Flesh. This is interesting. I'm not super huge fan of classical music, definitely not Paganini, but what they did here is very interesting. Unfortunately, whenever I listen to this record, there is also a fairly negative side effect, and that is that I get a fit of rage, and I want to break, if not the record itself, the head of the producer or maybe Andrew Lloyd Webber himself. They put Gary so much in the background that you really must listen to the guitar all the time, otherwise you don't hear him. So again, this is Julian Lloyd Webber record. He's front and center. It's all about the cello. Actually, John Heisman's wife plays on the record. Barbara Thompson, she plays the saxophone. It's an interesting record. It's definitely worth a listen, but not an absolute must, especially if you're not into that kind of thing. Let's get back into Thin Lizzy. We said that we are in 1977, right? Thin Lizzy opens a new chapter, fortunes change, and Robbo, interestingly and unexpectedly, leaves the band. There was some sort of a bar brawl, and they were already starting their descent here, their demise, although it was not apparent yet, it was not obvious. But whenever things like this happen, even within one single band, but very often people don't realize that something was in the making for decades before it breaks out obviously into the open, especially in socio-political events. But even in a band like this, to me at least, bad reputation is also the beginning of their bad luck. The big famous song of this is of course Dancing in the Moonlight. Personal favorites are of course Soldier of Fortune, beautiful, bad reputation, great hard rocker, Opium Trail, beautiful sound. Another famous classic one is Southbound, Killer Without a Cause, good number. Downtown Sundown, okay song, listenable, and That Woman's Gonna Break Your Heart, beautiful, very emotional singing from Gary, and Dear Lord is not bad, some good guitar there from Gorham. Good record, very good record. No Brian Robertson. Robbo went here, and he ended up founding Wild Horses with Jimmy Bain, who would end up on Rainbow and later Dio. So again, good record. What can I tell you? Great harmonies. I think that Robertson did record, or maybe Gorham did overdubs with himself. But yeah, there is actually Brian Robertson lead guitar. So he already left the band, was cut out of the picture. He is on the back sleeve, as you can see. He's standing here on the steps and looking at the others. But by the time the record was out, he was out. Sad, really sad, and this is where Thin Lizzy, in my opinion, really starts going downhill and taking a turn for the worst. Next up, another somewhat controversial record. A lot of people call this record Live in the Studio. It's a very iconic, very famous live recording, and it's also controversial. It's fairly evident, but a lot of people claim without bringing proof. Oh nice, this is Japanese print. Has this insert but no obi, unfortunately. A lot of pictures. Back then when you got a double or gatefold record, even the inner sleeves had print images on them, unlike today. These modern records, I just don't like them. They for the most part, maybe too heavy vinyl. I have no use for the 180 gram. I much rather prefer those that are more flexible, and they don't give you a lot of artwork, so that they may make the record double or gatefold, but there's not as much artwork as here. Be it as it may, this is a very good live recording, or mostly live recording. The rumors are that they went into the studio and they redid a lot of guitar parts and fixed a lot of mistakes. And Brian Robertson was asked about it relatively fairly recently. I say in the next 2 decades, right? Recent to take it with, not as in last week, but so way post the end of Thin Lizzy, and he got all angry and kind of pissy and screw you to whoever says. But anyway, great record with all of the classics and the hits, and you get a very good taste and a very good idea of what they sounded live. Again, in my opinion, this is a must-be. If you like Phil and Lizzy, then this record is for you. Let's look back again at Gary. What is he up to? And remember, we just finished with Colosseum II, so this brings us to 1978. Very special year, because this is what the wind blows in. Again, this is an all-time classic. You don't have to be a die-hard Gary Moore insane fan like myself, who got my head all the way up his backside. This is an all-time classic. Whether you like Gary or not, this is really a record that anyone who appreciates good music good guitar owes themselves. And very interestingly, no one criticizes this record for being all over the place. About half the record is very hard rocking but jazzy fusionist stuff. The title track itself is kind of a rocker, but definitely has a strong fusion flair to it. You got Flight of the Snow Moose, you got the super fan favorite Hurricane, What Would You Rather Be or a Wasp. So all very jazzy, like half the record. There's 8 songs on it. Back on the Streets, Flight of the Snow Moose, Hurricane, and What Would You Rather Be on a Wasp. I would have divided the record in 2 sides like that. With putting this on side 1 and then the rest on side 2. We got Don't Believe a Word. This is of course the slow version, the bluesy version. The story about that song is that Phil has written originally the slow bluesy version, and he brought it to the band, and Robbo told him straight to his face that this is a piece of crap and he doesn't want to play it. And Phil got so offended, so hurt apparently, that he disappeared for a couple of days, and then he came back, and in the meantime Robbo was already feeling bad about it, so he says, let's take a look at the song again, and they rearranged it, came up with a fast version, which is a great rocker and fits perfectly on the record. And he saved this one for a time of collaboration with Gary, which happened on this bad boy, Back on the Streets. Great record. Another piece of trivia: the Good Time garden tool here, waiting at the exit of the prison, is actually Gary's girlfriend at the time, Donna Campbell, if I'm not mistaken, whom I think co-wrote a lot of the words on the record and got credit for it. And of course, last but not least, right? Great work from Gary. I mean, insane. Hurricane. What Would You Rather Be or a Wasp? Flight of the Snow Moose. You hear Gary in his prime and his top Gariness, just doing his insane technical stuff, but also very tasty and very emotional. Even his jazzy and technical stuff is not dead. It's live. It puts a lot of his heart in it. And of course you got Parisian Walkways, which about 12 years later is going to morph into Still Got the Blues, but it's a little bit early for that. But that he's got like a moderate hit with it, and this sort of puts him on the map. But not before he has another stint in Thin Lizzy. This time not just credited on some songs, but as a full-blown member of the band. This Thin Lizzy, when I got this record, I remember I went home, I put it on, I just couldn't stop listening to it. This is mind-boggling. This is another level. A lot of Thin Lizzy fans are critical of it. They say that this is not real Thin Lizzy, this is not the classic Thin Lizzy. And in a way they're right, they do have a point. This definitely is a departure. This is definitely Gary. You bring in Gary, even though he's not formally the leader, but he's gonna put his stamp on the work. Do Anything You Want to Do is the hit. Actually, no, the big hit is Waiting for an Alibi. But Do Anything When You Want to, good song. Toughest Street in Town and S&M. Listen to the solos. This is shredding before the notion was invented. Sarah is a nice song. Got to give it up. Phenomenal song. Get Out of Here, also very good. Some ferocious guitar work from Gary. With Love, super emotional song. And from the words of both of these songs, got to give it up. I have got to give it up. That's tough. I have got to give it up. That's tough. Really, Phil sings from the heart, and a heart that's not well. So he pretty much predicts his own demise. Great record, great cover art, and of course a rock legend, insane guitar dual play with Gary and Scott. Great record, just well done, production, everything. It sounds good, the drums are good, the bass is good. Just a very good record. And again, Gary here in his prime, Gary in his tip-top Garyness. What can I tell you? This could qualify, in my mind at least. I know that many of you would not agree with me, but this would easily qualify as an actually bona fide Gary Moore record with, let's just say, Phil guesting on the vocals. But again, you don't necessarily have to agree with me. So